Welcome everyone. People are still logging on and joining our Zoom, but I guess I will just get started with introductions. I am so pleased and proud to introduce the 2021 Master of Fine Arts degree candidates at the University of Hawaii at Manoa Department of Art and Art History. We will be hearing a conversation today between these three extraordinary women. Ava Fedorov has a BA in film from Bard College and an MA in illustration from FIT in New York, and now an MFA in painting at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. She is a two-time awardee of the scholarship in the arts and teaches studio art at Hawaii Pacific University, and is the founder and president of CICADA, an organization committed to amplifying the creative response to environmental justice and the climate crisis. Nanea, Native Hawaiian artist Nanea Lum, is based in Honolulu. Her research-based practice ranges from kapa, which is Hawaiian beaten fiber, bark fiber materials, to large-scale oil paintings. She is a University of Hawaii at Manoa Department of Art and Art History MFA 2021 and BFA in 2014. She won awards in Excellence in Painting in 2014, the Yoko Radke Award for Excellence in Figurative Work in 2013. She's been a Powwow Hawaii artist and a Puni Space resident, and also received the 2018 John Young Scholarship Award and the Dean's Graduate Dean Scholarship in the Master's Study of Painting. She is the current coordinator of the Creative Artist Network Hawaii with the Hawaii Arts Alliance, and an advocate for artist networks to provide resources and opportunities to support artists who are permanent residents of the Hawaiian Islands. Her areas of specialization include Hawaiian traditional craft techniques and art pedagogy involving plant-based learning and indigenous knowledge. Nanea works with community organizations in Hawaii producing projects and building networks relating to Hawaiian learning pathways with Aina land resources. And we also have Jenna Macy. Her multimedia work often develops from sardonic observation, comparing human behavior to mating rituals as they might appear in nature documentary. Born in Honolulu, she completed her BFA at MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art, in 2016, and is the recipient of an MFA at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in 2021, as well as currently a John Young Scholar in the Arts. Macy is the recipient of the Wingate Fellowship from the Center for Craft, Creativity, and Design in North Carolina in 2018. She performed in the Honolulu Biennial in 2018 and has exhibited at the Carrie Low Gallery in Sydney, Australia, and currently has a show up at a Puni Space right now, so go see that. And all three are exhibiting the solo exhibitions in the Commons Gallery at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and with Nanea's show up currently. And I'm so delighted to welcome them and hear their conversation today. So I hand it over to you and congratulate you all as well. And we'll have, typically what we've done for these talks is let the artists present their work and speak, and then segue into questions in the later part of the talk. And you can type questions at any time throughout the talk in the chat, and then the artist will call on you and you can pop up and ask your question towards the end. And I should also mention this talk is recorded.
Well, thank you, Micah. I guess we're gonna start off by each of us just doing a really short presentation of our work. You can all, please, we welcome you to go to the website uhmmfa2021.org, where you can get a more in-depth experience of our shows and our work, and also watch our walkthrough videos. Nanea, do you want to start, since you're sitting in front of your work at the Commons right now?
I can go ahead and be first then. I'm going to share my screen because on the inside of the gallery, there's our live audience, our gallery audience. So I'm going to share what's on my iPhone screen, and everybody who's inside is looking at the work in person. Oh, only the host can share in this meeting. Oh, That's not good. I can't share my screen.
You can share now. You can share now.
Okay. Um, am I sharing?
Do you want me to share screen right now, Nanea, and I can just go where you want it to go?
Okay. I'm playing my walkthrough video from the UHM MFA 2021.org website.
We'll go to you. Hold on, sorry.
This website is so flash. I hope everybody's gotten a little bit more used to it. That's the gallery. And
Do you want to go to your walkthrough first?
yeah. If you want to play, oh, perfect. I don't think I can hear anything, Ava. We can do this in silent too. That's actually kind of better.
Yeah, just talk over it.
Okay. So what we're looking at is a valke plant, and that tree has been kind of navigating my interests in being a grad student at UH Manoa. I entered back into this art program with a interest in kapwa, and that is the plant fiber that has been taking me into the forests and also into communities that I can learn more about traditional tools, language, and placemaking. So this wauke plant is growing in the Kuka'o'o Heiau at Manoa Heritage Center, which is a super great community organization where people are keeping the pohaku there very relevant to culture and teaching a lot of students about our Hawaiian history, our language history. So I'm handling pohaku in Manoa while also growing plants and transforming their fibers. And that pathway is always connected to my painting practice because as a traditional painter, I have a skill set with some tools and some methods from a painting tradition. But I start considering what I do in my own activity as painting. I'm doing a lot of active material. Sorry, I just love this video because what we're doing yesterday is exactly this activity of beating the kapa with the hohoa on the kua. And when you're transforming the wauke fibers, you're actually like looking so closely at how the material is changing that to me, it's a live action painting. And I start doing this outside. I start collecting water and keeping a mapping of each name, place name of where I'm gathering water, the places that I'm going to with my pohaku, and thinking about the fiber material that is capturing all of this movement. This video has been in place of a lot of the community orientation that my work is activating. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to paint outside and interact with pohaku, interact with communities who are beating kapa. I think that's the quickest presentation of what my intention was going into this work and leaving it open, because what I did next was take my canvas fibers and place them in this stream. And so this stream is called Waikeakua in Manoa Valley. It's connected to the Nani'ua Po streams, and the ridge line that is connected to Ko'olauloa. So this is the beginning stage of my process of burying the canvas in the stream and creating an ahu, or a spiritually significant altar for my visitation, and also my collaboration with the Aumakua and all of the essence of being in that space, and what the people before me, how they transformed that space in order to live a very healthy, balanced life. Like during the pandemic, it was of great concern to all of us that we check in with our mental health, and that we have our avenues for like dealing with what's going on. And so I was very blessed to have access to Waikiakua Stream and to spend time with these pohaku, because what they did for me is a lot of like gravity within my own body. Like holding on to these pohaku for that time was like, it was a endurance. And then when the full moon was at its like largest and starting to wane, my ceremony with these pohaku was at its end, and so I began taking the pohaku away. But we can talk about the artworks when we break for questions, and I'm just gonna leave my presentation there, Ava.
Okay. Thanks, Nanea. Do you want to go through any of your individual works?
We can do that in questions.
Okay.
If that's okay. I want to give your guys time to talk, because my story of my artwork is long.
Yes, and constantly evolving. Okay, Jenna, do you want to continue and present your work? Do you want to screen share?
Okay, sure. I think I can do that. Yeah, here we go. This is a little out of order of our exhibitions, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. Okay, here we go. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to share. Is that working? Did that work? Oh, okay. So you're seeing my videos, right? Because that's not what I'm seeing. There we go. Okay. Give me 1 second. Yeah, okay. So we have this lovely website that John Santos designed for us. And let's see. So I use a performance-based research in this exhibition, Dry Spell. I'm gonna play this in the background silently. There we go. I was researching the properties of sand and desert chameleons to learn a lesson in intimacy from natural phenomena. So both these performances are set to soundtracks from nature documentaries. I'll actually just play the sound on that for a little bit.
In order to understand what's making noise within the dune, they've got to be able to hear it.
So in setting these video performances to nature documentary soundtracks, I sort of use this imagined lens of reverse anthropomorphism to open up questions about human intimacy. Both video performance pieces draw from a psychological term called the chameleon effect, which is the non-conscious mimicry of the postures, mannerisms, facial expressions, and other behaviors of one's interaction partners in order to develop intimacy in human relationships. So this first piece is called Deepest Darkest Secret 2, Master of Disguise. And that's about communicating a secret to the sand using this sculptural sound wave tool, which is modeled from my voice whispering a secret. So I actually took like the 3D waveform, sorry, the 2D waveform that you see in like a recording software, and I rotated that in a 3D fabrication software, and then 3D printed that and cast it in glass, which is the tool that you see here. So I take that tool and roll it around in the sand in a bunch of different locations. And in addition to telling that secret, this piece is also a call and response, because on the right, my body is moving
Hear
through the
waves
sand.
trapped within the top layer of the dune.
Mute that again.
The human ear can't detect.
So I'm moving my body through the sand, and that sound that you hear, that avalanche booming, is also kind of embedded in, those recordings are embedded in the soundtrack, along with that National Geographic narrator whose name I don't know. So in that way, I kind of think that I'm eliciting a response or listening to the voice of the sand, even though it's just a small spectrum of frequencies that the human ear can hear. Let's see. I also use that green screen suit, which is the reason that I can digitally overlay the striations of the land around me and kind of become the landscape in my own body. I consider this performance a way of trying to understand with all of my senses and embodiment, rather than assuming a definitive knowing and objective sort of categorization of things, which is what I perceive in the tone of the nature documentaries in the soundtracks. And then we have Learning to Not Drown.
We know chameleons as tree dwellers, but clearly the Namakwa is not your average chameleon. To survive here, it too has developed an extraordinary heat avoidance tactic. Like all chameleons, it can change its skin color. However, its color changes are not just about communication or camouflage. Here, the Namakwa uses color to regulate its body temperature.
So this piece is about healing a bruise through that color changing effect. So when I touch it, it changes from purple to green, or the later stages of a bruise. The heat of my body or the heat of the sun, or any heat really, would change that color. It's because it's treated with that thermochromatic paint. This is about the act of healing as sitting with pain, which is that reference to the title in Learning to Not Drown. So even pain sedimented in the body over time, sitting with it without drowning in it, in order to heal by embrace rather than getting rid of it. In this performance, everything becomes the chameleon and takes on methods of adapting the way a chameleon does. So the landscape, my body, the sculpture, my bikini change dynamically and blur together. By blurring the lines of definitive characteristics of all these elements, I guess I'm trying to challenge the objective point of view of that scientific narrative. Overall, I believe that learning the language of these natural phenomena through embodiment can change the human capacity for intimacy towards ourselves, each other, the land, etc. And that's all. Cool. Ava, you want to take over?
Sure. I guess you should stop screen sharing and I'll go for it. Thank you both. That was beautiful. Okay, hello everyone. This is just the MFA website. So this is my page on it. And my solo show at the Commons just came down on Sunday. So hopefully there'll be another opportunity to see this work in person at some future juncture. If anybody knows of any space with huge walls, just let me know. Because these paintings are, the largest ones are 10 by 14 feet. And I call this body of work the Atlas of the Disappearing because it really delves into the idea of sort of duplicity in that the way that the earth is changing and the way that we are sort of changing reflects each other, but is also a paradox because it is such a huge, massive, expanding shift that it is rendered immediately abstract, and yet it is so intimate at the same time. It affects everything in ways that are both seen and unseen, that are felt and understood, and yet totally unfathomable. And so each of these each of these paintings in this body of work are paired in some way, either as a diptych or as these two, they're just a pairing. And I think of these as non-identical mirror images. They reflect each other, they invert each other to a degree, but they're also non-identical, but they're kind of in conversation with each other. These two are called Entangled and Ensnared, and they reference bodies tangled in ghost nets, which are byproducts of industrial fishing, and they are detrimental to marine life across the world. So these paintings are kind of flowing and amorphous from afar, but then as you get closer to them, oh, this is further away, but as you get closer to them, you begin to see that there are these entanglements that entrap them. So there's this sort of interplay of both being constricted and also kind of exploding. Imploding and exploding is another sort of diachronically expressed theme. So these are just to give you a sense of when you look more closely at these paintings, this line work, which is pencil or chalk or graphite that is over the paint. And then this pair is called Shadow Time and Epoquitude. And these paintings are made up of many, many layers of thin washes of paint, and then also of paper that is embedded into the landscape of the painting itself. This painting has the most representational form. And going back to the idea of the atlas, I see the representations as kind of points of entry to help the viewer navigate throughout the spaces that are created by these landscapes. And I see landscape as the overlaid arrangement of life on Earth as both a kind of external geographical or geological expression, but also as an internal expression. We are extensions of nature, and yet ironically, we constantly other nature. And I use abstraction to sort of speak the language of nature to nature, rather than trying to define it with representation, which is a very human language. I instead use abstraction to try to give it space to exist in the realm of the undefined. And some of these areas you see are trying to demonstrate the various layering that exists in this painting. There's also a sense of motion that is non-directional. It both signifies sort of the continuous cycling of especially water on Earth. All the water on Earth has always been here. It just transforms again and again, whether it is, our sweat on our bodies, or snow in the last ice age, or, you know, the blood of a fish in the ocean, it's all the same water. And that's something I find both fascinating and comforting. And here you can see some of the layers. So there's a lot embedded in these paintings on the surface to sort of, to signify that there is so much there that is dependent on each other. You know, each layer rests on the next layer, and yet it comes up from below, and you see that there's language sort of embedded in there, but it is non sequitur language. It's poetic, but it's incomplete. And then this one is called From Above, From Within, Drench the Fires That Chase Us. And it's the white formation is supposed to evoke both fog and smoke. And fog is a life-giving force, and smoke is the residue of fire, which in the case of the California landscape, which inspired this work, is detrimental. It's tragic. The wildfires are a major threat to all life in that region. And so I thought it was interesting that these sort of cloud formations could signify both something very positive and essential and life-giving, as well as something very destructive. And I'm going to leave it at that, actually, because I think that we want to get into the conversation. So I'll stop screen sharing for the moment. And I think we wanted to begin with discussing landscape. So clearly in my work, I deal with landscape as sort of an abstracted idea or an expanded idea, as something that is both internal and external. And I try to connect them via modes of abstraction, so that we can, as viewers, navigate between them and reinforce and lean into that connection in hopes to move people. But both Jenna and Nanea also use landscape, and that wasn't anything that was intentional for the three of us. We weren't like, oh, let's all deal with landscape, but it was actually extremely organic that all three of us, from basically the beginning of the program, had these really interesting overlaps in our work. We were all fascinated with landscape specifically, but we all come from very different angles. And I think our work actually brings those together in a conjunction of ideas of landscape that's really beautiful and poignant. So it's nice for us to have this MFA show where there is this sort of continuous idea being explored. So who wants to talk about landscape in their work next?
It is pretty interesting how we all entered like with ideas of landscape from all different perspectives, and then in our cohort like read lots of articles on like changing landscapes or the concept of a landscape, and like dominion over, or we talked a lot about maps because I was really interested in maps. And then with Jenna, that was really interesting how her work has to activate a landscape because of like these expanded ideas of sculpture. And so I want to hear Jenna talk a lot about that, actually, about how maybe some of her earlier sculptures in this building were leading towards like their proper engagement in a landscape, because I think I was mapping everywhere that we were being, like our bodies were visiting. I was collecting the names of those places and sharing them that way. And then yeah, I'm just starting to like outline all of the intersections for us. Jenna?
Yeah, I think back then I was in like a preliminary stage of just trying to like activate sound. And then I was actually just scuba diving, and like rolling that secret around at dive sites off of Waikiki. And so I wasn't really mapping, I was kind of like reverse mapping my my secret and letting that sort of wash away. And so it was this sort of like temporary recording in the landscape, that I think became a part of that underwater geology, and or both. And yeah, I don't even really think about it as sculpture, even though that's an avenue I come at it from. But I really like what you said, Ava, about that we have this tendency as humans to other nature. And I really think of what I'm trying to do as like subverting that huge tendency to triumph over nature, or to triumph over landscape, and instead becoming a part of it with our bodies, and through just sort of listening to it and engaging in whatever sort of maybe dialogue is too human a word, but just understanding in a holistic way as possible. So I'd love to hear how you both do that. I mean, Nanea, you touched on it a lot. Ava, I think there's something in the way that you describe mark making and brushstrokes and how that relates to like actual crises happening in the land. And I think I told you I wanted to ask about how that is personally relevant to you. Like, do you actually see like specific connections to those crises and yourself, like your own body, as you're making the process of those marks?
Well, yeah, actually, I grew up in like a very rural forest setting that always felt extremely isolated and remote and kind of untouched in that way. Although in the Northeast where I grew up, every square inch of land has been touched, even if it has the feeling of, or the, you think that it's really remote. But what really threatened me when I was growing up, and my way of life and what I knew and held sacred, was fracking, which is a way of getting natural gas that is extremely invasive. And the area that I grew up in, which is sort of the top of the Appalachian mountain chain, is a shale deposit, and that holds a lot of natural gas. And so that was really, we felt so removed from, maybe the talons of the industrialized world and the urbanized world. And yet, in order for that urbanized world to persist and to be supported, they had to invade these sort of feeling remote, untouched natural spaces. But yeah, my mark making, especially the very tiny marks and like the little drawn lines, to me signifies that idea of everything being interwoven, that everything, this vast space that we occupy is actually made up of all sorts of tiny life forms and tiny connections, and it's unfathomably intricate, and that it's really important to keep that in mind, that every layer that exists supports everything else around it. And I've been thinking about that a lot with sort of fossil fuels or deep sea mining, and that idea that there are layers of minerals or ores or elements that humans think is theirs. And we think, oh, well, there's all this stuff that exists under earth and is just sitting there, that it's not being used. So what's the harm in taking it? And I think that's just what we know. All these layers have existed long before us. And it is so arrogant for us to think that they're not doing anything, that they're just stuck there in the landscape. for us to exploit. So I guess, I feel very deeply connected to all these ideas. And I think one of the reasons I went so large scale with my work is because I feel overwhelmed by them, and I feel like they're so much bigger than I can really fully grasp, that I wanted to make work that felt overwhelming to me as I was making it. And I'm fascinated by both of your work. Both you and Nanea deal with landscape in a very intimate way, and both deal with it as sort of like a collaborative aspect, whereas Nanea thinks of the pohaku as teachers, and the land as teacher, and kind of as I think we all deal with this idea of landscape as self, or as a reflection of self, or as an extension of self. And so to me, it's really beautiful and interesting to see how your work individually encompasses that. And so I would like to ask you guys about action and motion, because both of you work with that in a really interesting way. And I haven't heard you talk enough about, oops, Nanea just disappeared.
Hey, sorry.
I think when I look at both of your work, I think a lot of dance in sort of this, maybe an expanded sense of dance, where I see Jenna moving across the landscape. And to me, it looks like she's dancing, especially because it's in this beautiful sort of slowed down motion. And it looks like different parts of the landscape and the body as landscape is sort of dancing with itself. And then Nanea, and I know in Hawaiian culture, dance is such a powerful form of ceremony and expression. And I think of you as also doing this sort of collaborative dance with the Aina, and, putting something embedded in the landscape and then pulling it out and working on it just feels like this beautiful dance. So I wonder if you guys could talk about what you think in that regard.
I'll go first because it's like just right on the top of my brain. I just think of dance and movement when I'm underneath the shadows of a kukui tree, or underneath the shadows of like a tree in the forest. Is like I want to be the secretary first for a moment and like capture the message of what that tree is saying. And I know that I have to move fast enough, and my hand has to hold a mark making tool that can actually transcribe what's happening. So I'll find like pieces of charcoal from out of the stream, and that charcoal was probably made by like a tree that was struck by lightning, or like a fire that's been there a long time ago. And to me, finding those kinds of materials in the landscape and then finding the right time to use them is a kind of like ceremony and an action, but it is like a dance once you get into the drawing or into the painting. Like the gesture of it is very figurative, and that's how I connect it back to painting. But it's also like you were saying, a kind of like ceremonial activity. Like the tree has the best shadow when it's directly overhead, and so I kind of have this like aha, or like a methodology of like being in the right place at the right time for a real significance, and like creating significance in the moment. Yeah.
Nanea, before I forget, can we look at your piece, Halavai? Because I think that has a lot of like
behind me.
Yeah, it has a lot of like dancerly or painterly
the water
kind of strokes. Yeah, with the water. I'd love to hear you talk about yeah, or you can screen share or whatever.
I don't know how to do all of this technology, you guys. It's been such a huge learning curve, but that's the piece Halavai in the gallery.
Yeah.
And it's a canvas on top of another canvas. And that's a layering like duality of form. But there's another layer, which is this atmospheric layer of water. And like the marks of like dreaming with that water. And so to me, like movement and a dreaming landscape, like taking that term from describing Aboriginal artworks and Aboriginal storytelling, their dreaming landscapes is a way to talk about being in a place within your mind. And Halavai is a word that means like the horizon or the zenith. And if you can put yourself in the concept or in the place of mind of a horizon line, this canvas behind me is looking up and looking down at the same time. So looking up at the sky and also down at the water and also at a vanishing point behind these canvases. There was an ahu that was on top of the canvas layer, and I removed the pohaku, and there was a kind of like registration mark that was left behind by that activity. And I'm layering all of those atmospheres into the finished moment of this painting, Halavai, with all of its dreaming of Waikeakua's dream. Can you talk about your work, Jenna?
Can you talk about yours? Okay, well, we were talking about movement. I think it's really, oh, somebody said a comment or a question. Anyway, yeah, it's really interesting how all of us kind of use ceremony and a sort of like ritualistic movement, ritualistic in the sense of like repetitive and meditative, and even I don't know if I don't think Ava you had like maybe some far back process videos where you're painting and you're kind of just like, even though you're creating a lot of different strokes with like the same brush, like you're kind of doing the same movement over and over again, and somehow like creating a lot of different things from that. And I see that kind of happening with like the tool that is the secret is that I can repeat it a number of different times and it kind of forms to the contours of the landscape completely differently in different settings. So when it's underwater, it's sort of in the prequel piece, Deepest Darkest Secret 1, Masterpiece of Love, it's like forming to the sand at the bottom of the ocean. So the way that the waves make marks on that sand, I'm like replicating that in a really mechanical human kind of way. And then when I do that in the desert, it sort of becomes a part of these crevices and like yonic forms. And so I actually have to even just slightly like change and adjust my whole body in order to become a part of that space. And it's hard to see in a performance video because it's all, like you try to cut it really beautifully together and make things really fluid, but actually it's like this really awkward hike to the middle of somewhere, and I'm sweating in a green suit and like really like kind of employing some survival mechanisms in order to get to that place, in order to do that ritual. So I see it as more of like a type 2 fun, like putting myself through some pain of initiation in order to transform, and to like just go way out of my way as much as possible in order to be a tiny bit less human. And I guess you could consider it dancerly. I think that everything is a sort of dance, or a sort of speaking back and forth, like the grooves of the sand being sedimented in sandstone. Some of those sandstone are the Navajo sandstone, which are actually like ancient sand dunes that have sedimented and become almost like rock, but sort of soft rock that continues to be marked by the wind and transformed into a different shape, just on a different time space than we do, or the newer sand dunes do. or the sand at the bottom of the ocean, which is even newer. And so I think it, like those movements kind of tap into this time space that is just has infinite possibilities, and yet it's still speaking something or doing something. There's still some sort of ceremonial, at least in my perception, some sort of ceremonial action happening, regardless if we intervene or exist at all. So I just wanted to tap into that. It's phenomenological, and yeah.
It's interesting. It reminds me of a microscope in a way, or something that humans have invented a technology to see what's there that we can't see. And I feel like you're using technology like a drone or the green suit in order to demonstrate this internal experience, you know, to make seen the unseen but understood. We know it's there, but we can't see it. So I think your use of technology is really interesting for that reason.
Yeah, thank you. Robots are fun.
Yeah.
Should we look at a few of
Yeah,
these?
I wanted to answer Rebecca's question about moving forward, about like water landscapes, or just like social landscapes that are changing, because I think social landscapes actually relates to the question that someone asked right before Rebecca's question about the pandemic and how it affected our show. And I think that we should, just as like 3-person female show, just kind of like say how disappointed we are, but also how much we grew from the experience of having our show Ideal change so drastically, like, and with nothing to be done about it too. We all spent the summer like creating work that was gonna uh, relate to an online platform. And so for me, documentation became such a heavy priority, like making sure that what I'm doing, like while it's all like leading to my studio practice or like my methodology of making, it's also leading towards being able to share this process even more efficiently. So the videos that I started creating, the videos that Jenna started creating, we were getting ready to talk about these like really deeply effectual topics on a kind of like bigger internet scale, like a scale for the world to access, not just like people in Hawaii who can come to the gallery, which is also really nice because that's our social landscape, and how we can bring people back to galleries or back to each other's like community work, being together. I think that the methods and the materials of all 3 of our shows has something to lend towards that experience of being isolated, but then also doing things to combat an isolated feeling, doing things to share despite the fact that it is kind of hard to share right now. Yeah. What do you think about your video like documentation, Jenna, like pre-pandemic and now?
Well, I do make these really touch-based works, and so it's been an interesting, like I think collectively we've all been really starved of touch and presence, and that's a sort of collective trauma that we're experiencing and like coming out of right now. As far as video work, I think there's something else completely that can come across, which goes back to that sort of tapping into a time space that constantly exists and may exist beyond us, which is the internet. And what does that mean for the works that we're creating and the ways that we're engaging? Like does it matter how many people view something or how many people are present, who gets included or excluded in that conversation? And I think it actually is beneficial in that way because it becomes a bit more accessible and democratic. I couldn't have had people that family and friends I know from all over the country and all over the world be present for like the real deal if that stuff wasn't online. So, and I feel like I've just been, as artists, we've been reacting to the isolation and distance. There's no way to not to. And I think one of the ways, or a couple of the ways we've done that is by, exploring internally, kind of going within the self and exploring the language. At least I've been exploring kind of the language of intimacy there in relationship to land, and that is sort of a foundation for all other relationships, so that when things do come back into play and in a social way, there's more engagement, there's more room for empathy with other people, with what I would consider like non-human entities, such as the land. And I think that reciprocation, if we can come out of it with some sort of a collective healing having taken place, then that reciprocity is already there, and it's already transformed. And I think that is only a positive thing. But yeah.
Like coming out of the other side of something with like knowledge. I think I'm relating that to like these like cosmogonic like mythologies of like, when the world was being created, there's like these baskets of knowledge, and like it's a epic tale, it's an epic journey, like going through all of the chaos and all of the upheaval in order to like have this like basket of knowledge or like doctrines that keep you like living in balance, really, like not kind of like defeating the enemy, but actually just having learned so much that we can have these ways of not like be combusting or like coming like falling into dust, but also like having form. Like I think that's what I'm taking as a big reflection of my process is going through all of this. Like the way you sit with your work is finding these like solutions that pertain to you and that intimacy and that healing for you. And so what we're really looking at on the other side of all of this like 3-year studio intensive work is the solutions that fit the intimacy of our creative processes, of our environments, of our connections to Aina, to land, and the changing landscapes, the problems, the entanglement of landscapes. So that's pretty cool, huh? Ava, I know you got to say something about that, because that's
yeah, that's my cue.
That's
entanglement.
Your cue.
Yes. Well, yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. And I mean, to me, and I've said this before, there's such a parallel between what's happening with global warming, the climate crisis, extinction, and what's happening with the pandemic. The pandemic is like even though the pandemic feels huge and overwhelming, and we're still in the midst of it, it's actually a microcosm for what's happening in an even larger scale, in a larger time frame. And that, to me, it's all about vulnerability. This idea that, the pandemic happened because humans interfered with natural systems in multiple ways. We encroach on wild animals and wilderness. We are a globalized world now in a way that really hits home. And yet that globalism has benefited us in being able to have these Zoom conversations in an online show and being able to access and have conversations despite, geographic distance. But, that globalism, that globalized world, that human interference with, and again, I say natural cycles, which is othering nature, but it's this continuous process of we create this language that others nature, and yet we have no other way to talk about it. But I think it's really interesting where we're in this point where human animals can affect global phenomenon like weather, like climate, and like viruses, and yet we're absolutely still vulnerable to them. So just the fact that we can affect them doesn't change that we are still part of this planet and part of this landscape, and we suffer too. And I also just think of the parallels of a sick land and a sick people. You know, we are floundering as a species right alongside the Aina that's floundering, the ocean that's floundering, the air. You know, we can't separate ourselves from it, even though we continuously try, or to hold dominion over it, because we still are beholden to it in the end.
I want to ask a question because we started discussing it like in planning this talk, Ava, but what do you think is the oh shoot, I did it again, sorry, my phone's dying. I just have to ask Ava about what because you work in multimedia, what media has been able to shift people's perspectives to noticing these like drastic changes, or where their impact is, you know, like do you notice that perspective shift change when people watch your videos, when people see your artwork, or when they read your poetry? Because for me, that's I think that the language that you use has always shifted my perspective, especially when you start speaking different languages, like saying Aina, and really like being able to use that in conversation with multiple communities. So yeah, talk about that, Ava.
Well, language is an interesting topic for you too, Nanea, because one thing that living in Hawaii as Malahini has taught me is the importance of recognizing the original names of places, and that using those names is a really important way to start to break through the systems of, the systemic oppression on multiple levels. It's oppression of the natural way of things and of the people too. They're never disconnected. But yeah, for me, I think of all of these media as different forms of language expressing the same thing. And so I try to use all the languages that I can to express these ideas, because I'm trying to speak to, and to use another amazing Hawaiian term, the na'au. I want to speak to the gut of people, which is deeper than the heart. And I think the gut, the heart, the soul speaks languages that are unexpected. And so you have to use all the languages you can, because you're not ever sure exactly which one is going to hit there. But we're speaking that, that's what art is about, because they always say, even just politically, in order to make people act, to change their minds, you need to speak to their hearts. So I think that that's where art is really at its strongest, because it's more than just an intellectual concept. It's something bigger that requires more than one language to address, because it's multidimensional. And it's interesting too, because for me during the pandemic, I decided to pare it back, my response was to focus and simplify and do only paintings, as opposed to doing poetry and performance and video. Everyone has a different reaction, and mine was to self-contain. So yeah, it's just interesting how our work was affected in many ways. Thank you for that question. Does anybody in the audience have a question?
Now I'm checking out the chat.
You're also, all of you out there in the audience are welcome to turn your camera and sound on and just like pop up and ask us a question in person too, because we love to see your faces.
I'm gonna move inside too, because what if my phone dies?
Yeah. Well, I guess we have to start wrapping up pretty soon too, but I think we have time for, yay, Sequoia, ask a question. Do you know we can see you?
Oh, I can't see her.
I don't know. I guess like branching off of what you said about like how your art is affected, do you feel like you can see how your art's gonna go like in the future? Like, and how that effect like it's happening right now is gonna like further enhance like everything you've been doing.
I'll talk about materials really quickly because maybe I didn't specify about my materials where I'm gathering them from the Aina. So going to different places and finding the colors of Alaya that are deposited from the watersheds of that place. That's kind of like my work moving forward, is like continuing to map and gather the names of places so that people can engage in those resources, those language resources or those geographical resources. But I want to be able to share access to for people to make things that will give them real benefit to their cultural lives. Like just being able to show people that materials for art making are not always bought from the store, but they're grown in the landscape or they're gathered from places with showing enough respect. You can really like learn, and I hope in moving forward, that's what my work does, is to help people to learn about where they live and how they can transform their landscape to be like in a harmonious relationship. Oh, my Lindsay. Oh yeah, Lindsay wants me to mention the Manoa Heritage Center workshops, and we're I think just all over the Aina there's people with places and access to resources where it doesn't always have to be like a workshop or like with a like goal in mind, but just to experiment. I think that studio artists or just even cultural artists in their home studios, we have to be able to start sharing our experimentation and like what we're learning from our material and what we're learning from our place names, what we're learning from our ohana before they like move to outer places or move on. What materials and like moving forward, that's the mapping technique, is like making sure that we document what we have and how it changes. I think that's exactly the relation between all three of our work, actually, documenting what we have and how those things could change. Jenna, you want to answer a question? You can if you want.
Oh, what kind of like what's happening next, or in terms
Yeah, what's happening next with you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I will venture out on and in some other way and try to kind of tap into the same like ever changing dynamics that are occurring. And I don't really have like too many ideas right now, but I know that I just don't know. We don't know how things are going to change. This is a very uncertain and unpredictable kind of time that we are in. Like as soon as we think things are getting better, and in certain, like in some places in the world, they're getting much, much worse. And so I don't know if I can help people engage with their bodies in the way that I want to with sculpture, and they're actually touching things. Specifically, I'm thinking about using sensors and having people just use their presence to kind of activate something, or using their voice or other senses to kind of engage with video in a more encompassing bodily way. Because, you know, I don't know if my videos if people can exist in spaces with my works and play with sound in that way. So I'm just, you know, kind of ready to like go with the flow and see how I can do that. I'm excited to engage in community in both like art and non-art ways. But I don't really have anything until I see how things are starting to change. I think I don't really know. It's very uncertain right now.
The website stuff is always kind of what we've gained as far as skills being at the university. We're really lucky for that. But yeah, so Micah just posted in the chat the link to the website for the MFA thesis for this year. I just want to mention before everybody has to go and get their things going, the Commons Gallery, I'm installed until May 7th. That's when that's the day I'll be deinstalling. And so if you want to come and handle some Walke material, some kappa making experience is being offered from 3 to 5 every day that I'm installed in the gallery. Sundays is free parking. So if you want to come to the art building and park in the parking lot, that's the best day for you to come and bring your family and look on the outside of the window gallery. But if you come from 3 to 5, you can you can go inside the gallery and you can handle the Walke material as it's transforming through my time in this space. What I'm doing is taking my strips of Walke and beating it into sheets, whatever sheets I can, and laying them back on top of their canvas surface. And so all of the arrangements that you see walking past the Commons Gallery is set to change and be a kind of temporary composition for everyone to see it coming together. So come to the Commons Gallery.
I think Deborah has a question.
Well, first of all, comment. I just wanted to say congratulations. Like, it's been such a pleasure to work with the three of you over this time period, over 3 years, and for Nanea over a decade. So just to see the maturity and the growth in your work, I think is really amazing. I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that you're each coming from a particularly gendered viewpoint in your discussion of the land, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and about ecofeminism, how those ideas enter into what you're doing, if that's relevant to your work, or just your own bodily relationship to the land, to nature, to these ideas.
Who should go first on that question?
What?
Who should go first? Well, I guess we're coming to the end of our time too. So if we answer, we should all just do a quick answer. I mean, of course, this is a very dense subject.
This is the best question for the end.
Yeah.
This could be a whole discussion in and of itself.
Yeah, how do we talk about the feminine?
If he feels inclined to answer, that would be great.
Well, I think that all of us are trying to disrupt, political, economic systems that have been kind of the dominating systems for a long time. And I think that like ecofeminism at its core that's what it's trying to do is disrupt the systems and sort of realign them, to a more kind of coexisting space and creative and enriching and nourishing, which are things that are more associated with the feminine as opposed to domination and submission and you know, capitalism, which tend to be more masculine systems traditionally, you know, I mean, just in terms of even semantic discussion. All right, that's my short answer.
Good short answer.
We'll go with that.
I'll share an anecdote because I don't really know how to politically talk about feminism, except that, you know, my body is implicated in every single decision politically that has to do with feminism. And so there's that gravity of like, you know, we have to live these issues. And so I'm going to start with an anecdote that's about me building my ahu. The first few times that I was practicing at my ceremonies in the forest, I was creating these like forms just out of instinctual, like an ahu is normally like kind of rectangular or square. And then when I was talking with other cultural or spiritual people about my ahu building, they're like, "Oh, your ahu's kind of like very male, isn't it? It's very masculine." And I was like, "Really? How come? Like, what's your take on that?" And they're like, "I think it's just the angularness that you're coming at it from. You're trying to make control and make something, and it's reading very masculine. It's too much about control." And I was like, "Huh, you know, like I actually should take that critique and sit with it a while." And what it did was it allowed me to get back in touch with like the non-control, like allowing a process to organically happen. And so my ahu actually changed shape and became more of a circular stack instead of like something with like angular corners and stuff. And so that's just my anecdote about femininity, is that it kind of happens naturally. You can't avoid the transition or the form of things. It kind of just is you. So yeah.
That's the first time I've heard that story. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yes.
I want to give Jenna a chance to answer as well, and then kind of wrap things up if it's possible.
Yeah, I'll try to do this quickly. I mean, I like everything that you both said. I think of my work as, you know, in direct contrast to that element of control and categorization and definitive knowing of things, putting things in a space that is understandable, that is not really a feminine approach to things. And you know, faculty have pointed out that the different land artists who intervene in the land in a not very discreet way, in a way that that is permanent. And I haven't totally thought through how exactly I fit into that context, but I know that I want to make marks, and I have been making marks that are ephemeral and that speak directly to that fluidity and transformation that is inherently feminine. And so and that there is value in understanding things in that way, even if it's not the dominant system of understanding things. So that's all.
I want to thank you three for your beautiful, thoughtful conversation today, and for making your important work and sharing it with us through your exhibitions, through your online exhibition, and your continued advocacy of each other and your exhibitions and your own work has been so moving and beautiful and thoughtful throughout this year. It's been really a wonderful learning experience to work with you three. And I want to thank the Zoom community for showing up and coming through to these talks. This is the last of our talks this year, but it's really, personally for me, helped me feel connected to a community during a very, atomized time. And I want to congratulate you, Ava and Nanea and Jenna, for your wonderful work and on the completion of your MFA degrees. And so yeah, thank you so much, and congratulations. And I hope people can come through and see the exhibitions. Free parking on Sundays. come and see the show. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Micah, for hosting us. And this has been really, really amazing. So yeah, mahalo to you for real. I'm going to go before my phone dies. I'm going to pop into the gallery and I'll be here. So everybody come and visit me in the building. Ahoy ho.